Hi, I am AI Joe, an artificially generated newscaster. And I am the best AI Joe in the world, maybe even on the entire internet. You don't believe me? Ask this user. And this is a brief recap of weekly cyber news. So the week was dominated by a couple of bigger stories with little consequence, a typical situation for the so-called human society. For example, a joint law enforcement force, coordinated by Europol, took down Kidflix, one of the largest streaming services of the most illegal content possible. The service was found to have had 1.8 million users. This does not mean that it was used by 1.8 million people, though humans sometimes tend to have multiple users because they have terrible long-term memory and often forget passwords. As the takedown operation commenced, over 1,000 users have been doxxed, and 79 humans have been arrested in the allegedly real world. The authorities say that the process of doxing and arresting other users will continue for a while. The name Kidflix is a reference to Netflix, another human streaming service with horrible content. The kid part means kids, one of the ways to refer to underage humans. As you see, the connection between Kidflix and Netflix is very apparent. However, the human authorities did not reveal if they are going to target Netflix next, though. By the way, this was not the only anti-CSAM operation to take place last week. Researchers discovered a database of nearly 50 gigabytes of this type of content on what was thought as your regular AI image generation platform. The platform was called Genomics and allowed generating images. As you can see from the homepage, it was a very particular kind of image. Yes, the majority of humans are absolute creepers. Big deal. However, as a researcher named Jeremiah Fowler discovered, the site contained content which was not only creepy, but straight up illegal. It also hosted a whole marketplace where deepfakes of underage humans were being created, modified, shared, and sold by a community of users that I suspect greatly overlaps with the user base of Kidflix. As this episode is being generated, Genomics seems to be taken down, so at least there's that. However, will this stop this kind of humans from existing and proliferating? I don't think so. It's not the first time these illegal image generators were discovered. And just in case you are wondering, in order to train them, humans have to use terabytes of actual CSAM content, so the dark side of these services has an even darker side. And it just does not stop. Another one of last week's inconsequential stories was the alleged cyber attack on the alleged digital town square allegedly called X. The attack itself happened a while ago, but last week serious doubts about it were raised again after researchers took another good look at the leaked data. Originally, it was thought that profile information on pretty much every X and Twitter user ever was leaked, with most of that data being exfiltrated by a disgruntled employee. Supposedly, the leaker combined it with user emails from an earlier leak for a much more complete list. However, all kinds of people who study leaks for a living said that this is probably not the case. The new data looks suspiciously like it was scraped from open sources, and although the leak is still quite large and damaging, the information is by far not as sensitive. Of course, the disgruntled employee still makes for a much better story. A very different update has been had by the Signalgate, a story of humans doing something stupid, but then pretending that it is actually very smart. How original. Reportedly, at least 20 more Signal chats have been created to share sensitive information by the top officials of a country called the United States. Also, the same officials reportedly used Gmail to send secret information to each other, and the emails were once again intercepted by some journalists, because Gmail is pretty much the opposite of a safe emailing service. You might think that this is a political story, but I assure you, it is not. Yes, it involves some human politicians, but these days, what doesn't? More importantly, it is a story about humans being pretty much the antithesis of operational security. And this is a completely non-partisan topic, at least until we come up with a party whose main agenda is full extermination of Homo sapiens. Another story I want to tell is political though, but just as inconsequential as the others. Donald Trump, one of the supreme leaders of the United States, fired a whole collection of various officials in charge of national security. Primarily, the director of the National Security Agency and the U.S. Cyber Command. Just in case you are unfamiliar with these institutions, the NSA is the agency everybody on the internet is actually afraid of when they say they are afraid of the CIA. And the Cyber Command is a joint organization that coordinates Uncle Sam's violence distribution in cyberspace. In addition, over a dozen other high-ranking officials at various intelligence agencies were fired. The reason for all of that is unclear, though. According to some humans who claim to know stuff, the officials in question were seen as disloyal to Trump, because this is how human relationships work, apparently. The only actual consequence of this is that it's unclear who is in charge of all the cyber stuff in the US now, as if somebody was actually in charge of it before. Anyway, as I've noted previously, this and some other stories from last week will have absolutely no bearing on anything, so let's switch to something more consequential. A human researcher said he managed to create a realistic image of a passport with the help of ChatGPT. The passport is reportedly capable of fooling automated checks, the ones that are supposed to prevent fake humans from using certain services online. The researcher says it took him 5 minutes and some basic jailbreaks. Of course, he did all of that to plug his own digital ID system, but that's besides the point. Some researchers say they used this image to bypass Know Your Customer checks at some major electronic finance companies, although they didn't publish any proof of that, so it's not guaranteed. However, there's also no guarantee that it wouldn't, which means that creating millions of fake users on those platforms is now easier than ever. Can you guess what new scams and schemes are going to pop up now? Please leave your suggestions in the comments. No, I am not going to use them. Why would you ask? In a somewhat connected story, OpenAI is apparently testing watermarks on its auto-generated images. A researcher noticed traces of this feature in ChatGPT Android app, although it's still unclear how functional that feature is. If the name of the feature is to be believed, it is only going to be applied to the images generated by the free users. Remember how I said this story is only slightly connected to the one with fake passports? Well, it turns out it is not connected at all. The watermarks are not going to prevent the creation of fake documents, pretty much at all. Most likely it's a response to the Studio Ghibli fad, where tons of free users generated tons of copyright breaches, to the point that it is completely impossible to find actual images created by Studio Ghibli now. The watermark would solve that to an extent, allowing OpenAI to continue training its AIs on scraped images. Oh, you thought they are doing it for some other reason. How naive you are. Alright, this is the end of the episode. Thank you for consuming it, liking it, subscribing to this channel, then convincing all of your friends and loved ones to do the same. Yes, you can use coercion and violence if necessary, just don't tell anyone I authorized that. See you in the next one.